What does it take to do the impossible? What does it take to level up your game like never before?
Hey there, Rian Doris here with the Flow Research Collective. Now today we're going to be talking about adaptability, anti-fragility and post-traumatic growth. Today's module, we're going to be defining anti-fragility, what it means to become anti-fragile, and then we're going to be wrapping up with post-traumatic growth. Now most things in the world can be classified into three main broad categories. There's the fragile. These are things which break when exposed to stress or chaos over time. Then there's the robust. These are things which remain unchanged in the face of chaos. And then there's the anti-fragile, things which become stronger when exposed to stress, chaos, and variability up to a point. Human evolution to date is incredibly anti-fragile. We've evolved from our ancestors based on genetic features and traits which have helped us survive and succeed. Almost everything in the world that has lasted a significant portion of time has an anti-fragile system in place. And you can see how this works here. Where the fragile is damaged by disorder, the robust is resilient to disorder, and the anti-fragile actually benefits from disorder. Now, anti-fragility, this concept, was really innovated and popularized by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who's an essayist, scholar, statistician, and former options trader and risk analyst. His work concerns problems of randomness, probability, and uncertainty, and here's how he describes anti-fragility. Taleb says that some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors, and love adventure, risk, and uncertainty. Yet in spite of the ubiquity of the phenomenon, there is no word for the exact opposite of fragile. Let us call it anti-fragile. And here's the thing, anti-fragility transcends mere resilience. Anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same. The anti-fragile gets better. This property of anti-fragility is behind everything that has changed with time. Evolution, culture, ideas, revolutions, political systems, technological innovations, cultural and economic success, corporate survival, good recipes, chicken, soup, or steak tartare with a drop of cognac, the rise of cities, cultures, legal systems, equatorial forests, bacterial resistance, even our own existence as a species on this planet demonstrates anti-fragility. Now, these terms of anti-fragile and robust are relative terms. Some people are more anti-fragile than others. And also, anti-fragility can apply to specific elements of a system. For example, you may have cancer and be physically fragile while your spirit remains anti-fragile. The worse the disease gets, the more your spirit and resolve and attitude develops. You may be a soldier or athlete and be physically robust, even mentally anti-fragile and dealing with enemies, but be emotionally fragile in relationships. As we go into each, be thinking about what things in your life fit into what category. Is there a way you can make your life and the things in it less fragile, your business, your career, your mindset, your relationships? Because these principles of anti-fragility apply everywhere. And what we want to do is learn to gain from disorder by developing anti-fragility. We want to become anti-fragile systems so that stressors on us and volatility results in gain. Because anti-fragility is really the ultimate weapon to fight overwhelm and uncertainty. When something's anti-fragile, it gains from disorder to not only recover from mistakes and uncertainty, but to get stronger. Being anti-fragile is different as we've said, from being resilient. Antifragility is the ability to not just withstand challenges, but to thrive as a result of them. And the good thing about the randomness of life is that it helps us become better at dealing with risk and uncertainty. We can use turmoil, disorder, and stressors as a stepping stone to creating an anti-fragile life. And with that, anti-fragility is all around us. Your body is the perfect model of anti-fragility. Stressing your muscle causes it to grow. Struggling to understand an idea makes it more likely that you'll remember that idea. The stress of mental challenges causes your brain to develop new neural connections, and the body keeps improving your immune system when exposed to certain levels of bacteria or germs. And interestingly, flow states may even be an example of anti-fragility in nature. When you think about flow's triggers, the rise in stress within the challenge skills balance, risk, complexity, uncertainty, the fact that your physiology is kicked into an optimal state as a result of these stressors is in and of itself a good example of anti-fragility. And this underlying principle of anti-fragility can be applied to our finances, relationships, and work. We often have ambitious expectations from our deliberate goals and habits, but often we ignore the fact that randomness, stressors, and things out of our control can disturb our best laid, most well thought out plans. And by trying to ignore random factors, we become extremely vulnerable to them. One way to think about this is that wind extinguishes a candle and energizes fire. And we want to become that fire. So let's talk about 10 ways that you can transcend resilience and become anti-fragile. So the first way you can do this is to build in buffer and redundancy. Taleb says that layers of redundancy are the central risk management property of natural systems. Redundancy is ambiguous because it seems like a waste if nothing unusual happens, except that something unusual usually happens. Redundancy is ambiguous. And so sometimes we have to work all the more hard to embed it. And nature is filled with inefficient or seemingly inefficient redundancies. Animals have 2 lungs, 2 kidneys, and 2 testicles, when one of each would function just fine. Since one in a pair of organs can become disabled through disease or trauma, it pays to have a spare, however. Now the key here is to add redundancies into your life. Start that emergency fund. Add buffers to your schedule to take into account of the inevitable volatility that comes each day. Arrive early to everything. Have a backup morning routine you can default to when you're super tight on time. Equip yourself with that bug out bag, whatever it is. The key thing to remember here is that the gains from redundancies increase as volatility increases. Redundancy is a waste. It's inefficiency until something unusual happens, and something unusual usually happens. As the Chinese proverb goes, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So build in buffer and redundancy. And the second thing we want to do is to seek optionality instead of forecasting. Let's hear from Taleb again on why this is crucial to develop anti-fragility. He says that any options by allowing you more upside than downside are vectors of anti-fragility. If you have optionality, you don't have much need for what is commonly called intelligence, knowledge, insights, skills, and these complicated things that take place in our brain scales. For you don't have to be right that often. All you need is the wisdom to not do unintelligent things, to hurt yourself, and recognize favorable outcomes when they occur. The key here is that your assessment doesn't need to be made beforehand, only after the outcome. So seek optionality instead of forecasting. Keep your options open. Increase optionality in your life. Because when volatility and chaos increase, it's the person with the most options who is the most anti-fragile. And more to the point, this is really, really crucial. I want you to grasp this. When you have optionality, outcomes don't matter. Because no matter what the outcome is, you have options. So this liberates you from prediction. It liberates you from forecasting. It liberates you from wondering about what if. It liberates you from having to be right in your predictions as to what's to come, and it just switches the focus from attempting to predict or forecast into the future to acquiring options now, which is something you can do. So how do you increase optionality? Well, having money in the bank increases your options. It gives you breathing room during economic downturns, but also provides flexibility to take advantage of positive, unforeseen opportunities or to pursue goals. Increasing your skills gives you optionality as well. If one career goes bust, you've got the skills to jumpstart a new one rapidly. Expanding your network gives you optionalities. You can choose amidst a greater pool of opportunities or favors and requests if needed. If you're preparing for an exam, rather than trying to forecast the questions, prepare for all possibilities and give yourself optionality. When going for a walk, bring a rain jacket rather than trying to predict whether or not it will rain. When you begin using this decision heuristic, it brings you into the present and out of wondering about the future mode. The question becomes, how can I best prepare regardless of what happens, instead of, I wonder what will happen so I can prepare for it. And this is a subtle but immense difference that yields anti-fragility. The next thing we want to do is to suffer voluntarily to avoid involuntary suffering. A common phrase that gets at this point is easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life. The point is that if you proactively and intentionally expose yourself to challenge and stress, you'll be less susceptible to the unintentional, unwanted sources of challenge and stress that plague many people's lives. Have ice cold baths and be less likely to get a cold or a flu. Work out intensely and be less likely to suffer unwanted cardiac issues or die from obesity-related causes. Avoid frivolous, instantaneous spending and be less likely to get enslaved to debt and financial ruin. Have the painful, candid conversation now and avoid years of passive, aggressive relational rot and decay. The point here is to intentionally inject stress in your life to avoid the unwanted, externally imposed stressors. The more you do this, the more anti-fragile you will become. Our next one here is the adversity level up. This involves responding effectively to adversity and using the excess energy that's released from an overreaction to setbacks to innovate. So whenever you suffer adversity, minuscule or immense, find a single positive change you can implement as a result of that adversity. Use the pain of the adversity as fuel for behavioral change and build this habit so that adversity simply becomes a precursor for an intentional level up that you build into your life. Let's take some big and small examples. You ruin a presentation and damage your professional reputation because you stayed up late watching YouTube and you were underslept. As a result of this, take significant action. Downgrade to a flip phone that has no YouTube to ban yourself from this sort of low value activity forever. You break your diet. So you give away all junk food in your house and never bring it into your house again. You lose a loved one and decide to spend an hour meditating on the shortness of life every day for the rest of your life. Whatever it is, condition this causal loop between adversity and a positive behavioral change. Build the habit of identifying and instituting a level up that corresponds to every instance of adversity. Next, use the barbell strategy. Taleb describes the barbell strategy as a dual attitude of playing it safe in some areas and taking a lot of small risks in others, and as a result, achieving anti-fragility. Playing it safe reduces the potential downside of volatility, and taking small risks exposes you to the potentially massive gains from the same chaos. For the average Joe, this could mean keeping your boring day job, which is the safe end of the barbell, while working on your side hustle at night, the risky end of the barbell. If the side hustle doesn't work out, you still have your boring day job, but if it does work out, you could live the dream of working for yourself and acquiring more wealth. Within your business, this could mean doubling down on extremely safe clients and contracts and having a small skunk works on the side like Google does for extreme innovation that has a huge likelihood of failure but a huge possibility of immense upside. Number 6 is to be aware of the Lindy Effect. The Lindy Effect is a theory about the way non-perishable things like technology or ideas age. It states that non-perishable things age linearly in reverse, meaning the older an idea or a technology, the longer its future life expectancy. And essentially the idea is that the longer something has been around, the more likely it is that it will be around for a long time. Books that have been around for 2 millennia should be around for quite a bit of time, and so forth. You can use the Lindy Effect as a way to select what books to read, what problems to solve in business, what diets or workouts function best and are more sustainable. And it's a great thing to bear in mind when trying to see through a fad and get at significance or permanence. Number 7 here is to practice via Negativa. According to Taleb, the first step towards antifragility consists in decreasing downside. And we do that through practicing via Negativa, which is a Latin phrase borrowed from theology. And it means that instead of focusing your time on adding things to your life to make it better, focus first on subtracting habits, practices, things, people that fragilize you. A few examples: get rid of debt, quit smoking, stop hanging around toxic friends, eliminate unhealthy foods. And interestingly, via Negativa also applies to accessing flow consistently. So much of unlocking flow is subtractive. It's about removing distraction, removing impulses, removing uncertainty about what action to take, removing unnecessary stress, removing limiting beliefs and fixed mindsets. When you pull all of this gunk out, getting into flow is pretty natural and easy. Now, number 8 is to assess skin in the game. As Taleb says, never ask anyone for their opinion, their forecast, or their recommendation. Just ask them what they have or don't have in their portfolio. Never take advice from someone who doesn't have skin in the game. We live in a world in which people's actions, opinions, and advice are divorced from consequences. We no longer force people to have skin in the game, and this fragilizes society. Financial advisors on TV can give terrible advice, and pundits can spout off wrong opinions, but suffer no consequence for their erroneous predictions, even if those predictions harm others. When determining whether or not to take advice from someone, look to see if they have skin in the game. If the person dispensing the advice or making the prediction has nothing to lose from being wrong, don't listen to them. Pay more attention to people who have accepted risk and responsibility for their words. A simple way to get value from this is to ask your doctor what they would do if they were you, rather than asking what they would recommend. This forces an element of perceived skin in the game. Develop backup modes. This is 9. And a mode in this example is a way or manner in which something you experience, express, or do things. Now, everything in the universe goes through cycles, cycles of high energy and low energy, cycles of change and stability, of focus and distraction. And we're no different. But most of the time, we're trying to force ourselves into a certain mode that we're not in, and that causes trouble. Identifying different modes that you find yourself in based on energy levels, temperament preferences, behaviors, tendencies, and then learning how to roll with these modes more rather than constantly forcing yourself into a certain mode can guard against the excessive rigidity that ultimately makes us fragile, because there's always too much uncertainty in reality to be able to stay in one mode forever. We need to have multiple optimal modes for being. And then we need to be able to oscillate between these modes frictionlessly. Maybe we've got our optimized mode where everything is really ordered and structured and we're dialed into our habits perfectly. Then maybe we've got work mode where we're knocking things out incredibly well professionally, but a little bit less social. And maybe we've got recovery mode where we're dialing it back. We're more sympathetic, dominant, and relaxed. And it's recovering us for work mode or optimized mode. Maybe we've got novelty mode where we're creative and we're fueling up on inspiration and input. And then maybe we have creative mode where we're using that fuel to build things and create things, and we're less optimized and rigid, but we're producing more originality. And then maybe we've got quiet mode where we desensitize to dopamine and connect with ourselves. You want to have multiple modes. You want to be able to bounce between them and ensure that each of them is in somehow optimal and that it's ultimately moving you towards your goals and highest level of well-being. Another thing you can do to heighten antifragility is to invert your explanatory style. Now, explanatory style is a cognitive personality variable reflecting the way that people habitually explain the causes of good and bad events. And there are three crucial dimensions to explanatory style: permanence, pervasiveness, and personalization. The dimension permanence is about time. This dimension refers to whether the causes of an event are perceived as temporary or permanent. The dimension pervasiveness involves the generalizability of an event. It's the question of whether the event is believed to have a specific cause or a universal cause. And finally, the dimension personalization is about who we believe is responsible for the event, whether it's ourselves, internal, or someone or something else, external. According to Seligman, pessimists and optimists differ significantly in the explanatory style they have when facing positive and negative life events. Optimistic people attribute the cause of positive life events to internal, permanent, and universal factors, and cause of negative life events to external, temporary, and specific factors. Comparatively, pessimistic people attribute the cause of positive life events to external, temporary, and specific factors, and the cause of negative life events to internal, permanent, and universal factors. Take, for example, being hired for a job. An optimistic person tends to attribute such an event to personal characteristics, such as being intelligent and highly skilled, internal factors, of which are steady over time, permanent, and applicable to a range of other situations, such as in the event of applying for another job or in regards to accomplishing other things in other areas of life, universal. A pessimistic person, by comparison, tends to attribute such an event to things outside of oneself, such as there being few other applicants, and to the particularities of the job only, and believe the reason for being hired will not last or will change over time across situations. Now consider a person who is not hired for the job. A pessimistic person will tend to believe the cause of the event has something to do with oneself, such as not being intelligent enough, of which one will not change over time, and is seen in many other situations and circumstances. By contrast, an optimistic person may attribute not being hired to not having the relevant skills for the job, external, and will believe that he will get hired elsewhere in the future, temporary, and that not getting hired only happened because of the skills required for this particular job, specific. An optimistic explanatory style is associated with higher levels of motivation, achievement and physical well-being, and lower levels of depressive symptoms. and suicidal ideation, according to Seligman. And according to Martin Seligman, the godfather of positive psychology, you can learn optimism. So what we want to do is flip the explanatory style always so that a negative event is not permanent, pervasive, or personal, and a positive event is all of those things. And this heightens our antifragility, because when something bad happens, we believe that it is temporary and isolated with an external cause. Now, the final thing that we want to mention is post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is essentially when you have an anti-fragile response to trauma. The idea here is that scar tissue is stronger than normal tissue, both metaphorically and literally. And the idea of post-traumatic growth is a popular one, that survivors of traumatic events can not only heal from their trauma, but may actually grow into a stronger, more driven, and more resilient person because of their trauma. And according to the Post-Traumatic Growth Research Group at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, post-traumatic growth can be understood as a positive change resulting from an individual's struggle with a major life crisis or traumatic event. In 2011, United States Army behavioral science officer Stephanie D. Nelson outlined a post-traumatic growth plan for treatment of individuals suffering from PTSD. This treatment plan included several techniques that the evidence suggests will aid you if you're suffering from symptoms of PTSD, categorized into 4 chronological stages of treatment progression. Number 1, stage 1, deal. Stage 2 is feel. Stage 3 is heal. Stage 4 is seal. So let's walk through these stages briefly. And there's actually an exercise that you can run to activate post-traumatic growth and have an anti-fragile response to an adverse event using these 4 stages. So starting with stage 1, which is deal, we want to write out a trauma narrative. The trauma narrative is you telling your story to yourself through writing of the traumatic experience. And this can be difficult to begin as the emotions engendered by the original trauma can come back. But it gets easier as the process goes on. Now, if you're dealing with severe trauma, you want to make sure to seek a mental health professional. But if you're doing this exercise, you want to begin by focusing on the facts, the who, what, when, and where of the experience. Next, you want to add the thoughts and feelings that arose for you during the experience. And once you're starting to become more comfortable listing or describing these thoughts and feelings during the experience, move on to the most difficult or disturbing moments of that adverse event or trauma. And again, you don't want to do this for severe trauma. You want to seek a mental health professional there. Now, this phase can be a little difficult, but it's necessary to put together a comprehensive narrative of the trauma. Finally, you want to take what you've produced, what you've written out, this narrative of the trauma, and wrap it all up and create a seamless narrative, in addition to adding a final piece about how you feel now, what you have learned, and if you've grown from the experience since it happened. So that's phase 1 of post-traumatic growth, deal. And phase 2 is to feel. And as the name of this technique suggests, this is where you are exposed to the traumatic memory in order to connect the fragmented cognitive and emotional aspects and facilitate catharsis. And imaginal exposure therapy is applied in this step, where you read back your trauma narrative and attempt to process the event. And again, if you are dealing with severe trauma, mental health professional is important here. You do not want to do exposure therapy on your own. You can have a reactivated traumatic response. Then you read through this narrative and explore the emotional response that comes up when processing and exposing yourself to memories of the adversity. And you want to do this And over time, set some time each day aside to process through this traumatic experience, focusing on purging certain emotional aspects of it. It will likely be emotionally challenging to dredge up some of these memories and tie some intense feelings to them, but that is where these emotions belong, with the traumatic experience that spawned them, rather than displaced into a fragmented self or onto others. The next component here is to heal. And then this involves putting the pieces back together in a new and stronger configuration than before. Here, you want to acknowledge that you've got freedom of choice. That while you didn't choose the experience, it led you here, and you're in control of your choices going forward. The narrative notion here is that you're rewriting the ending. And then you want to find meaning in the experience. You want to see what meaning you can draw from it. And then finally, you want to think through the transformative journey of the experience and tap into almost a hero archetypal narrative with respect to it, trying to determine what benefits have come from going full circle. And finally, you want to seal. This involves tying up loose ends and putting the finishing touches on the reorganization of the traumatic memory. The mind as a filing cabinet metaphor is a great one that you can use in this step. In this metaphor, the memory of the traumatic experience is likened to a file that is unorganized and scattered throughout the filing cabinet that is the mind. And instead of each component being neatly sorted with the others, they're separated into dozens of different folders with no rhyme or reason, making it confusing and potentially disruptive when one of them is inspected. In the previous 3 steps, these components were identified, hunted down, and moved to the right folder, while a few new pages were added, documenting the growth experienced through the process. And this final step finalizes the folder and files it away in the cabinet. And it can be revisited in the future, but it's no longer anything more than another in the hundreds of thousands of files and folders that make up the cabinet. And at this point, you're ready to move on to another disorganized file or adverse experience if there's another one that's in need of reorganization for post-traumatic growth.
Now for today's exercise, the exercise is to apply the adversity level up to a recent challenge you had. I want you to think back to the biggest challenge that you had. I want you to think about what prompted or gave rise to that challenge or moment of adversity or suffering. And then what level up can you extract from that and embed going forward to modify your future behavior. Now, well done on making it to the end of today's module. Hope you found it useful and insightful. I'm excited for you to become increasingly anti-fragile as the world becomes increasingly volatile. Thanks for your time, energy, and attention, and all the best.